This is Guardian Radio, your station for up-to-the-minute news, intelligent, interactive, and engaging conversation. 96.9 FM. The views and opinions of the hosts and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the position of the management and staff of Guardian Network.
Good morning and welcome to Guardian Radio AM. Today is Friday, March 24th, and it's a little after 11 o'clock in the morning. Once again, this is C.A. Newry, and I shall be your host for the day as I have a provocative conversation with Dr. Bain. And everyone's going to say, but who is Dr. Bain? How do you just say his name just like that? Today is World Tuberculosis Day, World TB Day. And the Ministry of Health is doing a series of education protocols and are going to radio stations and explaining in detail about the awareness and education about it. So I brought in Dr. Bain. I have his first name, Carlo Bain, right? And he's going to go in detail. But before we do that, we're going to do our first commercial break because I have a series of questions I need to poke him with, and I don't want to be interrupted later on. So let me take advantage of this commercial, and then I'll come back with Dr. Carlo Bain from the Ministry of Health.
The Grand Bahama News is available every Tuesday in the Nassau Guardian. Buy your local paper at Freeport Convenience Stores, Western Bakery, DeGregory's Fine Foods, and Bellevue Gifts. Want to reach your Grand Bahama customers? Then call Barefoot Marketing at 827-4578 or message them for ad rates via their Facebook page. Advertising opportunities now include classified ads too. Keep up with all the latest Grand Bahama news in the Nassau Guardian newspaper every Tuesday.
Love the show? Want to give your support? Become a sponsor today. Call 302-2300 for our rates and packages. That's 302-2300. Become a sponsor on Guardian Radio 96.9 FM. Fresh news, smart talk, all day.
The new Guardian Radio app is here. Listen live to all our Guardian Radio shows and live video stream select programs in our studio. Get information about Guardian Radio shows and our hosts. Send messages including text, email, and even call. All from our amazing new Guardian Radio app. Download it free today in your App Store for your Apple device or Play Store for your Android device. The all-new and improved Guardian Radio app.
This is Guardian Radio, 96.9 FM. Fresh news, smart talk, all day.
And welcome back to Guardian Radio AM with C.A. Newry. I have Dr. Carlo Bain, who is a senior house officer at Public Health, and I'm interviewing him now to understand what this TB is all about. But first of all, I need to understand exactly what is it that you do, a senior house officer, and all of that. Go ahead. Because I know you're a specialist.
Thank you.
Correct me. No, you correct me and you tell me.
I speak it upon myself. So you're right. I am a senior house officer, Dr. Carlo Bain again, thank you, who is employed by the Department of Public Health, and I function in the National Surveillance Unit as a senior house officer. So I am a physician. And in the National Surveillance Unit, the role there primarily is the detection, the management, and the prevention of infectious diseases. When I say infectious diseases, these are the things that are caused by organisms. So your bacteria, your viruses, your parasites, the things that are what we call communicable, meaning that they can transfer from one person to the next. So we wouldn't necessarily be dealing with things like your hypertension, your diabetes. We would have been primarily involved in recent times with the COVID pandemic and monkeypox scares and cholera and things of that nature. So in addition to that, I also work along with the National Tuberculosis Program, who is responsible for the detection and the management of tuberculosis cases in the Bahamas. And so I'll take that as a perfect segue to highlight that because of my work with the National Tuberculosis Program, I wanted to spearhead the effort today to get the word out as it relates to March 24th, also known as World Tuberculosis or World TB Day, so that we can educate the Bahamian public as much as we can.
And what exactly is tuberculosis? I know it as TB, right? And then you have this big word, tuberculosis, right?
Right.
But what is TB?
Very good. So, good question. So, TB in and of itself is an infectious disease. I already said that it's caused by either a bacteria, a virus, or a parasite. TB in itself, in particular, is caused by a bacteria, Mycobacterium tuberculosis. And the way that it introduces into the body is it's airborne. It's usually transmitted through nasal droplets, and it comes into the body, and it usually commonly wreaks havoc in the lungs. But it can also infect other parts of the body as well, possibly the kidneys and other locations in the body. And so once it's actually in the body itself, it can cause you to develop certain symptoms if your immune system is not strong enough to keep it at bay. This can be anything like coughing, losing some weight, having some fatigue, not having any appetite. And so, of course, developing a fever. And so while all of this is happening, we realize that these individuals, once they're infected and they actually can spread to other individuals, they are actually a public health risk because, like I said, the whole role of the program and the unit of itself is to identify these individuals and ensure that they, once identified, that we can get them on a treatment regimen and isolated so that there aren't any further persons who are actually affected by this disease.
See, let me say it this way. When I used to be a manager of a small restaurant some years ago, one of my fellow employees caught TB or was exposed to TB. They closed the entire restaurant down and tell me that we got to take some kind of man one, man two, something, right? I want you to explain why they had to close the restaurant down to me and what is this man two type thing they sent me to go get.
Okay, two good questions. So you said it right the second time. It's a man too.
It's a man too.
Right.
Okay.
So I'll answer the questions in the order that you asked them. So why would you want to shut the place down? It is a public health risk. I'll tell you why it's a public health risk. A restaurant, as I'm sure you can imagine, will have a fair amount of traffic. So if it is that we want to reduce the possible spread of tuberculosis in country, that means that we need to get a handle on it sooner rather than later, meaning that all individuals who may have been exposed to somebody with the disease would then need to be screened, because that's one of the primary ways that we can identify if you actually were infected or not. That screening test is what you spoke to, and to answer your second question is the MAN2 test. And that MAN2 test is a simple test. It involves injecting a small solution under the skin. I'm sure some of the listeners may have been familiar with it. And you go and you're asked to leave it there and then to come back within 48 to 72 hours to actually, that same place where you were injected, red. And that particular area is then going to be observed to see whether or not there's any swelling or rise. And that's because the solution that's injected under the skin is designed to react if there's any TB bacteria in the body. And based on your immune status, whether or not you're someone who's relatively strong or weak, they will determine how high that swelling is, and based on the height of it, because we actually measure it as well, then we can determine, okay, well, how severe is it, number one, and then what should be the next steps.
So the swelling it shows how severe it is. If it's swell up big, it means it's severe.
So we have it in 5, 10, and 15 millimeter durations. So that's dependent on one, your immune status, whether or not your body is already weakened, because if it's already is dealing with something, it's actually fight off tuberculosis as well. So if we have those persons who are unfortunate enough to contract both HIV and TB, we understand that we can look for a low rise, something as low as 5 millimeters in those individuals. But we can go as high as 10 and then 15 for individuals who may be relatively healthy, but they're constantly exposed to ill individuals. You're talking about the persons who are working in healthcare, for example. And then for those persons who have it full-blown, that's when we expect to see the high teens.
What do you mean by full-blown?
So when we talk about full-blown, we're talking about the number being a lot higher than 10 millimeters. We can have as high as possibly 15 to 17 millimeters.
Okay. But I want you to walk me through the step, right?
Okay.
I'm being exposed to tuberculosis, right? And they say, go to the hospital. What happens then? What do I do? Should I wear a mask going to the hospital?
I would, yes.
Okay,
yes.
Let's start from there. Hey, you're being exposed. Go ahead.
All right. So the scenario is that you've been exposed to tuberculosis. What happens next for you? the very next thing that happens for you is that you're going to be directed to the hospital. Why? Because several tests need to be performed. One, you would need to have a MAN2 done, right? Now, you may have had one done before, which is why you're recommended to actually come into the hospital. Because if that MAN2 test was positive, meaning you would have had that rise, that swelling present, the next thing we would need to know is whether or not you have what we call a positive chest x-ray. If it is where you take your chest x-ray now, and your chest x-ray shows images that are consistent with what we would expect with somebody who has tuberculosis, then that lets us know whether or not you actually have active or dormant TB. And I'll explain that because there are two different versions of it. So I would have said before that the bacteria comes in and it infects the body. If your immune system is strong enough, that means that it's in the body, but it can wall it off. You're not going to develop any symptoms. You're not going to be infectious. So that means that the TB bacteria is in the body, but it's silent. It's not causing any trouble. So we say that it's dormant. You would still need medication, yes, because we need to get it out of the body, but we're not considering you infectious. We're not going to say that you're going to cause trouble for anyone. Now, if it is where your immune system is weaker now, and you actually have some symptoms, and I can speak to that as soon as I finish answering your question, then we say to yourself that this thing is no longer dormant, this is causing trouble, so now you actually have active TB. And then that lets us know, okay, well, not only the length of treatment that you would have to go on, but what medication would be best for you at that time. So you have your, let's say that you have a positive MAN2 or somebody suspects that you have TB. You come into hospital or clinic, whatever have you. Let's keep it hospital. Come into hospital, and then you have your chest x-ray done, right? Now, if you have your chest x-ray done, if it is where they say that you have some positive findings, we are going to admit you to hospital at that time.
Really?
Yes. Because at that point in time, we say that you, sir, have active TB. That means that if we allow you out into the community, there's a chance that you may possibly spread this disease, and we can't have a public health risk to deal with. And so we're going to ask you to stay into hospital so that we can give you treatment, right? What's going to happen then is that we're also going to take some blood work from you, because the treatment that we give to you is a very strong treatment. It's called RIPE therapy. And RIPE is an acronym. It stands for the four main medications that we use: rifampin, isoniazid, pyrazinamide, and ethambutol. It's a combination. And so we then would give you, take those blood tests to see whether or not your body could actually handle that therapy. And then once we know that everything is a green light, then we can go ahead and we can commence with giving you that treatment. What usually happens is that you are treated for up to a 2-week duration.
So you've been in hospital for 2 weeks?
You have to be in the hospital for 2 weeks, at a minimum of at least 2 weeks. And then once you would have completed that treatment, and then we would have tested you again, because we want to make sure that once we test you, we actually have some proof that the medication was actually working. Then once we say, okay, well, things have actually been reduced, then we could actually allow you to go back home. But your medication doesn't stop there.
Okay.
Because we need to continue to give you the medication now to make sure that everything is completely cleared out of the system. So during that time now, what we're going to do is then inform our mobile team, which is referred to as DOTS. And it stands for Direct Observe Treatment Short Course. Means that persons are going to bring the medication to you.
They come to my house too?
They're going to come to you, and not only do they come to you, they work with you. Some individuals would prefer if they're met in their workplace. Some individuals, we have to work with various schedules. So the team really and truly needs to be commended, because they go above and beyond, because they understand that not everybody can take the medication at a convenient time. Some persons have children. Some persons have jobs that require some off hours. And so they try their best to be as flexible as they can to meet them where they are, to make sure that they take their medication. And you would then be taking your medication every day now for a period of sometimes up to 6 months.
Wait, hold on. First, you're going to be in the hospital for 2 weeks.
Yes, sir.
Then, depending on the treatment, you release me. Can I go back to work at that time, or are I still, in quotes, infectious? After you treat me for the first 2 weeks and you release me?
So by the time we release you out into the community now, that means that, okay, well, you can actually go back home.
Okay, go
right?
back home.
So if it is where we're saying now that you can go ahead and go back home, eventually, yes, you can return.
And now I take this medication. You said this medication is 6 months long?
It can be up to 6 months,
Up to
yes.
6 months long.
We have some treatments that can go as far as 9 months, but when we consider it that long, we have to understand that there are different types of tuberculosis disease.
There's different types of tuberculosis disease too?
There are different types, and they're different types because what has happened is that there are now some forms of tuberculosis that do not respond to medication as much as we would like. Similar to you have some in some pneumonias or some infections where the antibiotics that we usually use, we have to use something stronger because what we would call first line, the common ones, no longer work. And so we actually have what we call drug-resistant tuberculosis. So that means that some of the common medications that we use won't have any effect. So that means that we have to give you something different, and depending on how long it takes us to source it and how your body reacts to it, it definitely could lengthen the amount of time that you will have to take the medication.
And you mentioned the doctors, people who come to your place or where you at, right? Can you just get the medication in bulk and say, well, this is your medication supply for the 6 months or whatever?
That happens. That happens. We have some individuals who would have to come up to us from the family island. And so, of course, it wouldn't make sense for us to catch a flight down there to them. But what we would do is we would liaise with the healthcare team on whichever respective island they reside. We would give them the right amount of medication that would last them until the next visit when they would come up to follow up with us. And we would ask them then to take their medication as prescribed. And you may then say to yourself, okay, well, how do we know that they're actually taking them? So one, we would ask the persons on the ground to then pick up where we left off in terms of going to the house. But then what we started to do was during the pandemic, we can't necessarily go and visit everyone. Of course, it'll be an increased health risk. Not to say that the team wasn't doing it, but it definitely was decreased. So we've started to utilize technology. And so we would like a video or a live video call actually seeing that you're taking this medication, because one of the goals of the program itself is that we don't want it where a drug-resistant form of tuberculosis actually develops, because not only does that increase the public health risk, but it makes it difficult to treat as well.
I always thought like TB and tuberculosis was one of those Antilles, lower Antilles, lesser Antilles type disease. How prevalent is it in the Bahamas? Is it something that you see a lot of cases per year, or is there any rate like data census? Well, every year we see this amount.
So a lot of good news with that question, and thank you for that. Case-wise, we're relatively low. And when I say relatively, the World Health Organization in their most recent report as of 2021, said that the Bahamas has a TB incidence rate. And when they say TB incidence rate, incidence is speaking to the amount of new cases that are identified. So they give a number per 100,000 that they expect. So they said that out of every 100,000 Bahamians, they expect 12 new cases of tuberculosis. So if we say it's roughly 400,000 Bahamians in our Bahama land, that's 12 by 4, 48. That's less than 50 persons. So when you think about it numbers-wise, 50 persons infected out of roughly 400,000, the number is considerably low. Yeah. When we consider the fact that that's the Bahamas number, and we have some other persons who have 1, 2, 3, or even 4 zeros behind it, we realize that we're in a good place, but we still can't take our foot off the gas because, like I say, the only thing that it takes for a problem to go from good to bad is time. Yeah. And so because of that, we are taking advantage of opportunities like this so that we can continue to get the word out, because once you have the numbers down, the next thing you want to get over is that little plateau, the hump. So we're okay, well, persons aren't necessarily as concerned about tuberculosis anymore. And so once you're there, then you want to make sure that you stamp it out, because the next thing you want to say is that not only are the numbers low, but we haven't detected any. So we actually have a TB-free Bahamas. And it can happen, however, it can't solely just be the responsibility of the Ministry of Health. It would have to be due to community involvement as well, to not only get educated, but to also comply. If it is where you find that you are ill or if you've had any instructions, please follow them out to the best of your ability, because the thing with health is that sometimes you can't diagnose or assist persons that you do not know. And not only that, we find that there's a lot of begging, there's a lot of rowing, and most times we find that the healthcare worker can be more invested in your health than you are.
Now, I'm thinking Family Island because inside New Providence, it's easy to go to the hospital. It's easy to go to the clinic. You know, the Family Island, we understand the Family Island in terms of limited resources, right? I assume that the same protocols that has happened here in New Providence happens on the Family Island, that is easy access to go to the clinic and get the response?
Very correct. You have the same thing where if it is where you present with those symptoms, we expect you to go to the clinic. And more so often than that, I want to also make sure the listeners know that TB medication is free.
It's free
in the Bahamas.
They just go to the
TB medication is free in the Bahamas, so that can let you know the commitment that the Ministry of Health has to ensuring that this thing is as close to zero as we can maintain it going forward, right?
And you say free. When you say free and TB medication is free, do I go to the hospital to get the free medication, or I go to the pharmacy and say, pharmacy, this is my prescription, I come for my free medication?
So once again, when the hospital is giving you the medication is once you're in the hospital.
Okay.
Once you leave, that's when we bring it to you. Unless this is, like I said, one of those Family Island situations where we would give you a packet and then we would ask you to come back and see us so that we can either give you some more if it is where you can't readily source it on the Family Island for whatever reason.
Okay. You'd already briefly explained it, right? The difference between the TB disease and an active TB.
Right.
But I want you to go over that. And also, say I'm a person who did not get tested for TB. Right? By coughing a lot. And you say, man, you have a strange barking cough. Right? Is that something I should say be wary of and say, but you need to go test yourself for TB? Because this cough is it's been 3 weeks now.
So here's what I say about the cough, right? A lot of things can cause a cough. It may not just be respiratory like TB. Some heart issues can possibly cause you to have a cough as well. And so I would never rush and say, oh, well, you have a cough, go ahead and check for TB, right? Here's what I tell persons. You know your body better than anyone else. And so you will know when this cough is unlike what you usually would have. You're not just clearing your throat. This is something that's been on you for a significant period of time. When I say a significant period of time, that means that it's been more than 3 weeks and this cough still has not left you. You have this vigorous, this violent cough that's going on, and the cough is maybe so bad to the point where you're actually coughing up blood. If it is where you have a cough like that now...
I cough in the blood. I go to the hospital.
As you should. You should. So if it gets to that point, then yes, make sure that tuberculosis is one of the first things that you're concerned about. Who's to say it could be something else? But you want to make sure that it's not TB.
Okay. So, I'm sure that the Ministry of Health and Wellness is trying to eradicate TB from the Bahamas. One of those things, but we don't have it here in the Bahamas no more, right? What is it that the Ministry of Health is doing to pursue that?
Okay, so there are several things to that effort. So when we talk about the role of the National Tuberculosis Program, if I had to give an example, it's more so referred to as the TB Surveillance Unit. When I say surveillance, imagine if the entire Ministry of Health was one large security camera system. And so the National Tuberculosis Program is the camera that's focused solely on TB. So that means if there's any cases going on, that'll be the first place that we would look at to say, well, how many cases, which islands are affected, which medications do we need to source? They would have the eye there to be able to give us an answer right away. And so because of that, all of their objectives now are aimed to ensuring that they can do that surveillance function better. So that means that they want to, one, detect all the cases, because as it works in medicine, you can't treat what you don't know. And if it is where we know that some persons may be suspected, we want to make sure that we isolate, we actually test those persons so that we can know their status. We also want to ensure that those individuals go forth with treatment. So that means that not only do they get the right treatment, but also for the right duration as well. And most importantly, we also want to ensure that we do not stop persons from being compliant with their treatment. And I'll tell you why. If you take your medication on and off, you say, okay, well, I don't want to take it now. I'll fall off. I'll take it again when I feel like. Here's what happens. Here's this bacteria now that, okay, I had some medication that slowed me down. I'll pick back up. had some medication that slowed me down and picked back up again. What's happening now is that you're increasing the chance for you now to develop a resistant form of this tuberculosis. And that's a bad idea all around, because had you been compliant the first go around, that means that your treatment course would have been the regular amount of time. Now it's going to be longer. Not only that now, but that means now that you put other persons at risk. Because if you are a relatively younger person and you have a drug-resistant form of tuberculosis, that means that okay, well, you could probably fight it off. You'll do fairly well.
Yeah.
Grammy may not be in the same state, and your little niece or nephew may not fare the same way. Not to say that they may pass away, but you're going to make them have a more difficult time with the symptoms and everything to that nature. And so that, once again, is one of the things that the National Tuberculosis Program is doing in DOTS, making sure that persons get their treatment and making sure that they have public awareness forums like this to make sure that we have the message out, and ensuring that from a logistics standpoint that we have all of the medication, all of the resources available so that we can continue to do the work to make sure that the TB numbers stay low in the Bahamas.
I know that the Ministry of Health tends to recommend, if you're feeling sick, to go to the clinic instead of presenting yourself at the Princess Margaret Hospital in order to avoid the bottleneck. Right? Now we're talking about TB, right? Which one should I go to? Should I go to the clinic, coughing like crazy, like barking like dog, or should I go to the hospital one time and say, "Hey, I expose"? Which the better place to go?
I don't think there's a better place. We really just want you to go.
Just go.
We want you to go. Now, if you go to the clinic, more than likely, based on if it is where you're coughing and everything is severe, they're going to refer you to the hospital anyway. If you're at the hospital, great, because that means that they'll probably have the capacity there to check you for it, give you a chest x-ray and everything at the same time. But the thing is that we don't want you to say, oh, okay, well, I'll wait the next day and go to the clinic, or I don't want to try the hospital now, I'll wait. Whichever option is easier for you, to please go. We don't want you to stay home if it is where you suspect that you're ill at all. Now, I could understand that you don't want to go ahead and necessarily flood the hospital, right? And so to that effort, this is why shows like this is important, so you actually get educated. If it is where you have a relatively mild cough and they say you just wanted to get it checked up, then yes, you can go ahead and you can present yourself to the clinic, right? Come with your face mask because you think you may have something going on. But like I said, if you would know your body better than anyone else, you've been fatigued, you've been ill for this amount of time, like I say, regardless, you can go to either the clinic or the hospital. But if you feel it's an emergency, by all means, please present yourself to the hospital.
Okay. I want to know now, what can a layperson do to prevent the spread of it? Like, again, you're in that transition of you aren't going to the hospital yet, or that you know that you may have been exposed, right? But you want to protect the people around yourself still, right? As you try to find exactly what's happening. But what kind of things can I do?
So, I'm going to start my answer by saying this. The same things you would do will be the same thing that the pandemic should have taught all of us to do.
Okay.
I like to say now that we should all be pandemic smart. No one should have to tell anyone how to wash their hands anymore. No one should have to teach anyone about cough etiquette anymore. And understanding that this can be transmitted airborne by the passage of nasal droplets, then that means that if it is where you're coughing, you're not going to do it out in the open. You're going to try and contain it. If it is where you're ill, well, of course, we're going to ask you to stay home if you notice that you've been feeling weaker and have had some symptoms that usually go on longer than they normally do for you. If it is where you've actually said, you know what, I'm ill, I've taken a test, then you also extend yourself and say, hey, if I usually get a lot of visitors or a lot of traffic to my house, I'm not going to expose other individuals as well. Because like I said, like I used to say when I used to speak on COVID, getting COVID-19 is a lot like getting into a car accident. And I say that to say, sometimes it's not so much what you did, it's what someone didn't do. And so similarly with TB, here it is where you were going about your day and you were doing everything right. But somebody who had it was doing everything wrong.
Go on, touch that doorknob.
Not only touch the doorknob, here it is where they went ahead and coughed in their hand and they just decided to shake yours. And we could have a whole separate conversation.
See why it's dap people? So let's dap, man. Don't be shaking my hand.
That could be a whole separate conversation of how irresponsible some persons are. But to that note, historically, one of the ways TB was spread like wildfire was through spit.
But
You'll be surprised how frequent that was. And still is frequent now, whether or not persons stop at the light, whether or not persons are walking. It's a really bad practice, and I'll tell you
we
why.
spit outside. That's what you mean. I thought you mean spittle when you're talking to
Oh,
somebody.
no.
You're talking about spit.
Right. So when it is, when you hawk up, and I understand you don't want to keep it inside you, right? But let me tell you why that's an issue. So if there's any TB bacteria in that spit,
Oh, gosh.
wherever that lands, it's not going to stay in that same liquid consistency. It's going to dry up. Once it dries up now, it's going to enter the air.
What?
You got to think about who all breathes that air. You, me, every listener who can hear me right now, someone's mother, father, grandmother, or child. And so here it is now where if you're not aware of your status, say you may have been ill for a while, I tired of coughing, I just want to get it out. That means that you're not aware of your status, right? And let's say even if you go ahead and you get checked out, that means that if there was a high concentration of the bacterium in that spit, wherever it landed, that means that someone else could be possibly at risk now for contracting what you have. And it's a really, really nasty practice that we have in the Bahamas. And again, I understand it because no one wants to have that sensation in the mouth if you want to get it out. But just to be a little bit more cognizant now that you need to take some responsibility in not just your health, but the health of others when you do so.
So now we need a cultural exercise because spitting outside your car is something cultural. This is what
Oh,
we
yeah.
do.
Oh, yeah.
You know, you don't keep. Okay. But let's talk about World TB Day. Today
Okay, not a
is
problem.
World TB Day.
That's right.
And usually you have a theme. Mm-hmm. What is this year's theme?
So the theme this year, and I actually brought one of the shirts.
Did you bring me a free shirt, or you just bring that shirt to you?
No, I actually brought this to bring awareness. So
I didn't get no free shirt. Just saying, making sure I'm not getting a free shirt. No, go ahead.
We'll definitely continue. We actually had so much great support going forward from all of the family islands and hospital staff. That's why we're actually out. If not, I would have definitely had a mind to bring you one. So apologies for that.
I'm getting used to not getting gifts. That's
Oh,
okay.
don't
Go
say
ahead.
that.
Don't
Don't say
go ahead,
that.
Dr. Bean. Go ahead.
So the theme this year is Yes, We Can.
Yes, we can.
NTB, right? It's not something that was impossible now. When you consider that you only have less than 50 cases, if they're expected a year, yeah, man, it's different than when you consider something that may be 5,000. You get into the 5-6 digit figure range. But you have less than 50 cases. Yeah, man, it's possible. And so not only have we recognized that locally, but they've recognized that worldwide. And so they're putting the pressure on countries like the Bahamas and others that have that low rate to say, let's see if we can truly stamp this thing out. So let me tell you all the things they're doing. They have forums like this, radio shows where we're actually going out, making sure the message goes out to all of the community. In addition to that, we also have T-shirts, once again, to go ahead and spread awareness. So if for any time, whether or not it's today or any of the 4 Fridays going from now, is when you can expect to see healthcare workers showing solidarity in the TB fight, wearing either blue, white, or black shirts. These individuals, we want you to walk up to them, start a conversation, even if it's just to be informed. Because once again, I want to make the point that the work can't simply be done by the Ministry of Health. Every person we talk to has a family, has their own separate community, and as more persons become educated, then we have more persons aware to assist us in this fight. In addition to that, once again, going back into community awareness, we also have a display at the mall at Marathon.
Oh, there's a display at Marathon?
A display at the mall at Marathon, which will be going on from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. tomorrow.
Okay.
So for those individuals who are going to be in the mall for whatever reason, we ask you not to be shy. Don't be a stranger. If you see the tuberculosis store there in the display, come, get educated. If at the very least, at least say that you know more than you did before. And you'll be surprised how far that education could take you as it relates to this fight to NTB.
I would learn more about this spittle thing and how you can educate people to stop spitting all over the place.
Oh,
That's
boy.
a whole program and a reach out and awareness that needs to happen now. I mean, going to schools, hey, stop spitting.
And a culture change is definitely something long term. But I think the best place to start is to why to do it. Because I feel as if, as we learn in medicine, I can't just simply tell you take the medication. I have to tell you why. I have to explain the risks if you don't. So even if you do make a decision, it'll at least be an informed one, should you decide to stop or not. So similarly, at least if you go ahead and give them a reason why to, then they can say, hey, well, I made a conscious decision whether or not I wanted to put someone else at risk.
Okay, I'm actually speaking with Dr. Charlo Bean, who is a senior house officer at at Ministry of Public Health. And I have a phone call right now, unless someone wants to engage you and ask some questions.
No
So
problem.
patch that caller through and let's see what they say. Go ahead, caller. Can you hear me? Caller going once?
No, I'm trying to listen.
No, I'm here now. You can go ahead. You're live.
Yeah, but I'm trying to listen some more because I wasn't getting it, you see?
Okay. No problem then. But thank you very much, caller. I appreciate that. And there are a number of persons who are interested in the topic in general, right? So this is what I find fascinating. And I'm reading my notes, right?
Okay.
I see that this Dr. Robert Couch.
Yes. This is the physician who actually discovered it way back in 1882. So tuberculosis has been around for a while. All right. Once again, so it's part of the reason why we're saying that this disease has been here for too long now. We have the numbers down considerably, especially in a country like the Bahamas. Let's see if we can give that final push so that we could actually knock the numbers down. But since you would have mentioned him, it was a real difficult thing back then. You know, tuberculosis at that point could have been considered a death sentence. You didn't necessarily have the medications, right? Persons could keep you as comfortable as they could, but they know that, okay, once the coughing starts, the person is feverish, they're ill, they're fatigued, you really and truly try and make them comfortable. So once he actually was able to identify the causative agent, this thing that's actually causing this issue, now we can say, okay, well, we actually have somewhere to focus on. We know what to attack. Right, this small enemy, the silent enemy that was wreaking all this havoc. And again, I want to make the point that because it's caused by a bacteria, tuberculosis is preventable and curable, meaning that we could actually stop persons from getting this illness and we could actually cure them. And so because of that, I'm putting out a message to the Bahamian public. If you know someone who has tuberculosis disease, that person is still a human being. And so, of course, we're going to ask that you not stigmatize. Don't treat that person any other type of way. All right? The only difference between one person being ill and you is time, really and truly. And so when you consider that, if you know somebody who has tuberculosis, yes, of course, you may be, you may want to distance yourself away from them. Of course, I can understand that. But understand that because this is something that is preventable, this is curable, we don't want you to say, oh, okay, well, no, I don't ever want to see this individual again. I don't want to work inside this particular department again. I'll use the same example that I did before with saying that COVID-19 is a lot like getting into a car accident. For those persons who are well endowed, sure, go ahead and get another vehicle. But I know most Bahamians can't necessarily, wouldn't necessarily opt for that option. So if it is we get into a car accident, all you do now is you now move with more wisdom. That means that you'll avoid the potholes in the road. You would probably look left, right, or obey a few or more of the road traffic regulations. So similarly with TB, that means that if you didn't necessarily practice the best cough etiquette, that you'll start to do so now. If you didn't know what things to look out for, now you'll be just a little bit more vigilant. And if you didn't know where to direct someone who you know who possibly could have put you at risk, now you can say, you've had this for so-and-so time. Dr. Bain was on Mr. Newry's show on Guardian Radio, and he said that these are the things I want to look for. I strongly recommend that you go to either the clinic or the hospital to go ahead and get checked out.
Let's talk TB, tuberculosis, in the inner city.
Okay.
Right? I know you did a number of things you could do, wash your hands and stuff. But inner city communities tend to have small houses. And you did mention, you don't want no one to stigmatize. But how can I, having a family member who has been tested positive or what's not, be able to not ostracize them in the home, right? And I have a small house, right? How do we deal with a TB type person?
That's a very good question. And I would say the same way we were dealing with individuals who had COVID-19 and they were in households with more than one person. Now, I know it was recommended, okay, well, this person should isolate. But what you found was that individuals, they would respect the fact that somebody is ill in the home, but they didn't just say, okay, well, this individual didn't exist. They would assist them whether or not they were bringing meals to their door. They would say, okay, well, we're just limiting you to this particular part of the house. And it was with the understanding that we don't want the rest of the home to be compromised. But at no point in time does it mean, okay, well, I'm kicking you out of the home, or to say that, okay, well, after you finish with this, I'm concerned about my life, you have to leave. So I would start off by drawing that comparison. And then for the individuals who would then be concerned about their status, please be aware that we would ask all of those individuals in the home to then come into clinic to be tested and to be educated. Once again, to alleviate any fears, if they said, okay, well, this person was ill, doc, I don't know how I feel comfortable about them being in the house. Let's see what your status is too, because it's a good chance that most times when somebody is ill at home, you're not going to wear a face mask at home. Most times that's where persons get ill, where you drop your guard. Let's make sure that you're not in the same boat that they are.
I see you have another telephone call here. Producer, patch the call through. Go ahead, caller. Can you hear me?
Hello.
Hello, go ahead.
Hey, you got a good show. Good morning, Doc. How you doing?
Good morning. How are you?
I'm fine. Doc, you remember in Singapore, if you spit on the ground, the Bohemian guy was I think they gave him the canine tail decades ago. And no, you don't believe me, you could go search it out on YouTube, Google.
I know Singapore they spank you. I know it for sure.
I watched it live. It was live stream.
Okay.
I was so sad. But no, Doc.
Yes, sir.
It took TV back or was at a low pace?
So the thing is that I would say that TB never left, but the focus on TB was never as heightened, and I'll tell you why. When we think about infectious disease, most times we think about what's going to kill us right away. Certain things are always going to elicit a certain reaction, and that's another thing.
I thought it almost eliminated.
Well, we had the numbers down extremely low once again.
Okay.
But because they were extremely low and not down to zero and consistently at zero, that's why I'm still here today to say that we're still not out to fight just yet.
What is the number now?
So the most recent number, as it relates to the World Health Organization, I mentioned before, was 12 per 100,000. So we're still less than 50 cases a year.
That it seems like to me last time I checked, that climbed up.
One more time?
It sounded like it climb up. Last time I read.
Right, and so that has increased for several reasons. One, because of the pandemic. We understand that persons whose bodies were not at 100% before, once we add tuberculosis to it now that's going to make things a little more difficult. So we have that increased detection. More persons are what we call immunocompromised. And then also, we also have to appreciate that if we are starting to ramp up our testing, you're going to find out more persons now too. And so
that out to eat it too, right?
Yes, and that would also contribute as well. And so
talk about your vegetables. You got to eat your vegetables. Take your vitamins and be careful with your food. And your pumpkin, you have a good day.
Right, you have to make sure of that. Correct.
Bruce, I see you have another caller there. Patch that caller through too, please. Go ahead, caller. Can you hear me?
Yes. Good morning, Mr. Newry.
Good morning.
And good morning to your guests.
Good morning. Good morning.
Yeah, Doc. Listen, man. I've read. I've been reading a lot all the while, just throughout the years. But I noticed one time I read where they said there was a third of the world population infected with TB. Most of them are latent infections, like where the virus is dormant, right?
That's correct.
And then they said that, I read just now, they're saying a quarter. So I guess it might be a reduction, but once you inform the public that because of the latency, the TB can never really go away, because I went to prison, they tested me, I was negative, and when I came out, I tested positive for the month too, and I've been okay since. But then I guess my immune system is holding up. But then it was frightening for me that this actually happened when I was in prison. All right, living in close quarters in that inhumane asshole that they have there, right? And so this is what I didn't have any legal redress, In a sense, they didn't really they don't test you when you come out, but I found out subsequently. This is really a sad situation here going on. They would never admit that. All right, the same thing. I had a friend got sick from drinking and consuming the water in prison, but he was not compensated. He since had a kidney problem and since died. So we have to be really conscious. I know they have in the clinics they have classes on tuberculosis, but now I'm saying it's a quarter of the world's population and it's endemic to certain countries. So then we should still be all. I agree with the security paradigm that you're creating here. We should still all be careful because it's still out there. Bless up.
Very much so. Thank you, sir. And I'll also comment on that. He made a good point in referencing the prison, because there are certain areas where you do not want to have an outbreak, right? We're talking about schools, areas where we know there's high concentration of persons, because that's how many persons are at risk and possibly affected at one time. The prison is another one, because we understand that if it is what we're doing, what we're supposed to do, ideally that means that TB was introduced into the prison. And so because of that, now you want to make sure that all of the protocols and policies are enforced to make sure that we identify these persons sooner rather than later. But good point as well. We still need to continue to get the word out.
I see you have a text asking about the migrant population and shanty towns with TB. But the information you give, I guess, it basically means for everyone in the Bahamas, eh? Or is the shanty towns migrant population is more at risk? So to speak to that, when we're talking about things that are endemic and countries that have higher rates, we know that our neighbor in Haiti actually does have higher rates than we do here. So are we a little bit more concerned with the persons who come over here? Yes, we want to make sure that we're aware of those persons' Mantu status. But not to say that we're trying to stigmatize and say, okay, well, every single person who we know is from that nationality or came from that individual in that area is going to have it. We have persons who come over who are just fine. But once again, we always keep that high level of suspicion just to make sure that we don't miss. I have another telephone call here. Producer Pastor, call it through. I have another text asking what's the difference between a bronchitis cough and a tuberculosis cough. But let me go to the caller first and then you'll answer that next. Go ahead, caller. Can you hear me?
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Doc, I'd like to ask you a question. There was a prominent homeopath. His name is Dr. Staby.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know he used to smoke marijuana and so forth, so that could affect your lungs. But then all of a sudden, he took on the U.S. government, won a case. Then he came to Honduras and went into a prison and got tuberculosis. That's what his autopsy is saying. Do you have any inside scoop as to whether that's true or false?
No, I wouldn't be able to comment on that. I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that. But again, I would mention that is one of the areas where we definitely want to be more vigilant with persons possibly contracting TB, again, because individuals really and truly are helpless in the state as it relates to the living conditions, of course, won't necessarily be as liberal, as nice as if they were outside. So you want to make sure that even though that they may be in closer quarters, that doesn't also put them at any disadvantage to say, okay, well, now you're definitely going to get it, to make sure that all of the things to continue to keep their health and hygiene up is also in place as well.
Thank you, Doc.
Thank you very much, caller. So that question about differentiating between this bronchital cough and this TB cough.
Okay, so the thing is, to say that there is a TB cough per se is difficult to speak to. And I'll say that it's difficult to speak to because somebody who has tuberculosis who coughs, you will say, okay, well, this person, I've heard a cough if the person has a flu. I've heard a cough if somebody is clearing their throat. But I find it won't be fair to comment on the character of the cough. I think the best thing to consider when somebody has a quote-unquote TB cough is the duration of time that they would have been coughing for. So to say, okay, well, one is more barking than the other, or to say that one is more repetitive in the day than the other, I don't think would be a fair statement to say. What I would say, though, is that for persons who have tuberculosis, it may be so violent and vigorous where you may actually end up coughing up blood. It may also have some associated symptoms as well. We understand this is an infectious process, so the body is challenged. So you may have fever and night sweats and fatigue. So you more so may be looking to see if those other things are also present. In the event that person may have bronchitis, it may not necessarily be as severe.
Okay. I know we have 1 minute, but I want to read this text. It made me smile, right? But I want you to give an update on what all is happening tomorrow and what else, right? And caller, I can't receive next call. We ran out of time, so forgive me, caller. But the text goes, first, I want to thank you for this topic. Second, hearing this young man is so refreshing. Thirdly, the Bahamas has a positive... Okay. Anyway, lastly, you say, I like him for my university-educated daughter who lives in Canada. I can bring her home if you just give me the phone number on that. But give me the update on what all is happening for the celebration of Tuberculosis Day.
All right. So once again, Tomorrow, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m., we are going to have the Mall at Marathon display. Come out, get educated, speak to some of our healthcare providers. You will see individuals with their shirts. So please, every Friday, look forward to seeing us. Thank you so much for your time.
And thank you, Dr. Bean. That has been Dr. Charlo Bean, Senior House Officer, Public Health. Thank you very much for coming by.